Hey well, here we are with yet another tape deck. And I know you guys are probably going, what are you doing? It's like, I don't know. I was on eBay looking for some tubes for stock and stuff, and I just happened to do a little research on some Tascam decks, and I ran across this 22-2. And this one looks like it's in really good shape. The heads are really nice, and the thing with this deck, it's a pretty rare beast as far as what it is. It's a 7-inch reel deck that is a 2-track stereo, which means that it uses the full width of the tape in one direction, just like my Tascam 32 does. And my hope is that the electronics and the alignment and all that on this deck is good, and that it will record well. And if it will, after I get it mechanically fixed, then I can record a 2-track tape on a 7-inch reel and then put it on my Tascam 32 and see if the reproduce side of that deck is good. I do have some alignment tapes coming that have all the tones for 7.5 and 15. This deck does the 7.5 IPS and 15 IPS, and so does my big deck. So it'll work for both of those. And from the description, it sounded like it just had a broken belt, which is very common. They just turn into like this tar goo mess when they sit around. And that's kind of my hope, is this deck hasn't got a lot of use and that it worked well when it was put on a closet or on a shelf or left or whatever, and when they went to power it back up, the capstan wasn't spinning, and so it went on eBay. And I picked it up for like $350 as is, which I thought was a pretty decent deal for a deck of this quality. And it does have a broken belt, and I'll show you in this video how to kind of determine, or what are the symptoms of a deck with a broken belt. We're going to go into replacing the belt, and I'll show you like the kind of other mechanical things to check before you go test the sound of it, to make sure that like the deck heights are set right so that the tape is going through the guides correctly and it's winding up on the spools correctly and all that kind of stuff before you go try to use it. So let's dive into this deck and get this thing fixed. Okay, so let's check out this deck and see what's going on with it. I have taken off the sides and the back, which you might not necessarily have to do to put a belt on it, but there's some other adjustments and cleaning and stuff we're probably going to be doing on this deck, so I've got it done to that point. And let me show you what the deck is doing and not doing, so you can see how I came to the diagnosis that it's probably a broken belt. So we hit the power button, and that's a good sign that the lights on the VU meters come on. If they don't come on, that doesn't necessarily mean that the power supply isn't working. These things are known for the little incandescent light bulbs in the VU meters for burning out, but thankfully these work, so we don't have to repair that. So the first thing you want to do is move this thing up and see if you can hear the main motor turn on. And let me move the mic closer so you can hear it. And hopefully you can hear that. The motor comes on. But normally the capstan would be spinning, and it's not. So let's see if the other functions of the deck seem to work. Let's first hit play. Reels are spinning. That's not spinning. That's moving. That's all good signs that the real motors are working. And rewind, this one works. Fast forward, that one's working. Pause probably only works for the play. Head jumps back, goes back. So we hit pause, pinch roller moves back, it jumps back up, so that solenoid's working. The only thing that's not working is the capstan isn't spinning, and then that switch works. And the other thing to note is, let me fire this back up. Watch how quickly this stops. That means the brake's working. Same thing over here. Stops quickly. That means the brake's working. And so, yeah, this is all pointing towards the main capstan belt's broken. So, let me unplug it. And we'll start taking this front cover off. First thing you do is this little guy here comes off just like that. Then there's 4 screws in these corners, and these are a small Allen wrench. Go ahead and get those out. Now the counter is working. I bought a kit that has the main belt and a counter belt, and we'll take a look at the condition of the counter belt, and we may go ahead and replace it while we're in here, but if it looks like it's a lot of extra work, we may leave it alone because it seems to be working. So I get these 4 Allen screws out. Now this deck, the knobs just pull off. I would turn them down to 0, and you can see that the inner and the outer move separate from each other. So we're going to put them all on 0 and pull the knobs off. And just be gentle so you don't break the knobs, because it'd probably be next to impossible to find the knobs unless somebody was parting one of these out that had possibly a dead reel table motor or something like that that was possibly made it just not worth fixing. Now, to get these things off, that thing just unscrews and that slides off. We may not necessarily have had to take that one off to pull this top cover off, but I want to put a little bit of oil on the shaft to make sure that we've got plenty of fresh lube on there. Now, there's going to be a little thrust washer on here. You do not want to lose those little guys. And actually, I think I'm going to just screw this thing back on so I don't risk losing that washer underneath that one. Don't screw these down super tight, because it's fairly easy to snap those things off. I haven't done it, but I've seen people say that they have. You can see that's not a very big screw. And there's a washer right there. And then there's a washer on the underside. Again, I would pull them off and put them to the side so you don't lose those guys. Okay, now looks like we have a Phillips head screw right here. And then this looks like it needs to come out. I guess that's unscrewing. Yep. And okay, we've probably got some screws along the bottom here. Let me get on the other side and look at that. And yes, there's 3 screws that come in from the bottom we have to take out. And let's see if this will lift off. And there we go. So there's our front cover's been removed. Let's put it over to the side. And I look under here, and yes, the capstan belt is definitely not there. And there's a little bit of goo on the motor pulley, but doesn't look like it's too messy. Now this is like super gooey stuff, this old belt, and some of it stuck to this flywheel under here. And it does look like we probably need to remove this head assembly to get to the belt easily. And that looks like it's that screw, this screw, this screw, and this screw. And then we've got this plunger here that goes into that solenoid. But the rest of it looks like it's pretty freestanding. So let me see if that's all it takes to lift this off of the capstan so we can access the flywheels, the motor drive, and clean all that up to put the new belt on. Here's our little post here. Look under here from the side and see if we're missing something. I don't know if it's just the wiring is kind of tight, and that's what's in our way. Really don't want to mess with that spring if I don't have to. I'm wondering if I need to unbolt this solenoid and kind of move it out of the way so we have more room for that guy to raise up. Because I don't see anything else that's keeping it from if we can, yeah, let me take these 2 screws out. Okay, there is an adjustment on this thing. So before we go any further, I'm going to put a little mark where that is, and then a mark where that one is. So I can put this thing back in the same place it was. I mean, the little counter belt looks like it's in pretty good shape. We may just leave that guy alone. Okay. That got that loose. Let's see now if... There we go. And here's our flywheel with our nasty belt, and you can see how it's just turned to goo. So let me clean all this goo off this flywheel and clean the mess off of that, and I'll show you how to install the belt. Basically what you do with this is you want to use something, and like note how this hooks from the outside like that, so we can get that out of our way. And you just want to get something like a screwdriver and, you know, a really small one, and come in and, you know, or even like an Allen wrench, and like get the easy to remove stuff off. And you can see how it's just a gooey mess. And then you want to come in with some alcohol and clean this flywheel off to make sure it's nice and clean for the new belt to go on it. So let me get all that cleaned up and I'll show you how to install the new belt. Okay, so we got all this cleaned up, and there was some goop that got like up around in this mechanism. Whoops, that's a little cover for the capstan. There's some goop that got all up around this thing, so I had to clean this out. And then on this side too, to get this where it would snap back and forth like it's supposed to. It's supposed to go like this. And I put a little bit of really light grease, some little hobby grease on these slides, so this thing would slide back and forth nice and fresh. And you can see how this really locks down in these little studs. Make sure that thing's doing its deal like that. So I'm going to go ahead and change the counter belt. The one I got in the kit is actually a square belt, and the one that's on here looks like a round one, but it'll probably work okay. So to get this belt off, you have to take the counter off, and you want to make sure you mark where it is in the frame. And I use some black touch-up paint because this is what centers it in the little window in the front cover. And you want it to go right back where it was. So we take these two screws out, like that. And you can flip that off. Then to get it off of this end, you have to disconnect this brake. And this is also an adjustment, so you want to make sure you mark this. You can see there I marked it with a little bit of paint. You want to make sure you get that brake adjusted right back where it was, if it was working correctly. Now if it wasn't, and you have to adjust the brake, then yeah, you'll have to adjust the brake. There's that. And then you're going to go around like this. And while you're pulling this belt off, you'll notice there's a couple of little tubes up underneath these tables, the reel tables. Those are for oiling these motors. And while you're inside it, you might as well put a little oil in there. So get some really lightweight oil and put it on the end of a screwdriver and just hold it over the end of that little tube, and the capillary action will suck that oil down that tube into the motor shaft and lubricate these motors. And these didn't spin free like this before I put some oil in there, but then once I oiled it up, it's like whee. So yeah, good thing to do while you're servicing up the deck. And let's see if this belt looks similar. It's a little shorter, but the one that was on there looked like it was pretty slack, and so pretty sure this new one's going to be have a little more tension to it. And then kind of come in here and get it up over that little oil tube, get it down in the groove. And I don't think it's going to be a problem, this being a different profile belt. I think what will happen is the belt will just kind of run there diagonally down in that little groove. Whoop. So let's get that bolted back down and make sure that our counter's working like we want, because I'd hate to get this thing all up and running and then the counter belt break. And have to go back inside this thing. Now, a warning too, a lot of screwdrivers have a little bit of magnetism on them, so make extra sure you don't get anywhere near the heads with anything that might have some magnetism, because you do not want to magnetize the heads. That clearly would be a bad thing. I think I can see where this counter was mounted before. I don't know if this paint was the best idea. Something like a Sharpie might have been better, because the paint kind of bled through underneath this bracket. But we can make sure that the counter's centered in the little window before we bolt the cover completely back down. And then we want to make sure the brake's working like it's supposed to. So you flip this up, make sure that the reel spins, and then it stops. It might be a little tighter than it was. I want to make sure it spins freely. There's the, looks like the line where it was at. Let's see if that, yeah, there we go. And just make sure when the brake's engaged, you don't want it to just fly off the reel when it gets to the end of the tape. And then there's our counter. It looks like it's working just fine. And doesn't seem to care that the belt's square instead of round. It's sitting down in the little groove nicely. And we're going to double check all this before we put the front cover back on it. So the next thing it warns about is make sure your hands are squeaky clean before you touch the belt. I've just got some alcohol and dried my hands off as good as I can, and let this alcohol dry up. And just gonna be quick putting the belt on, so hopefully don't get any weirdness on it. I'm gonna try not touching the surface of the belt. And here's our new belt. So the first thing we need to do is lift this up, and we need to hook our plunger there in place. Put the belt around the motor, around the flywheel, like that. And so then you pull it down and get the flywheel through the hole in the front, and then spin to center up the belt a little bit, and then get it on the indexing lugs of those two studs, and then spin the caps in until the belt centers up. And man, that feels nice. And so the next thing, we're going to start with this screw on this one here that centers this whole plate in place. And put the rest of these 4 screws in. Make sure that's over the little stepped lug on the top of that spacer. You want to get these pretty snug, but obviously you don't want to snap them off either. So we're getting pretty close here. The next thing, we're going to stick that little guy over the top of that. So we want to get this plunger and put it in this solenoid. And then we've got our marks here on where this thing was mounted previously. So we put our screws in, and that's going to finish up the installation of the new belt. And again, this is a really common problem on these tack or Tascam decks that have that rubber belt like that, which most of them do. Like these are direct drive motors, but the Tascam is always driven with a belt. And there we go. So we're ready to do a quick test here and see if the motor spins the capstan. If it does, we have fixed the main problem that we had with this machine. And just for the visual, I'm going to go ahead and put the pinch roller on. And in the next video, we're going to lube and clean up everything in the tape path and run it with a tape with the front cover off of it. So if we need to adjust these deck heights, we can. Okay, so let's gauge the motor and there we go. It's spinning away. And let's see, I think this is play. There we go. Works beautiful. And I think it's a good place to wrap up this video. Well, as you can see, putting a new belt in this thing wasn't a huge ordeal. And it's actually a lot easier to disassemble this deck to get to the belt than that Tascam 32 is. Just the fact that the knobs come off so easy and all that stuff is just hugely easier to deal with. And again, this is a very unique deck. I don't think that really there's other 7-inch reel 2-track decks out there. And some people might say, you know, wow, you're not going to get much, you know, length of music, especially if you're on 15 IPS. And I'm probably going to use this deck at 7.5. And 7.5-inch deck that's a 2-track that's using a lot more of the width of the tape for each channel is going to sonically be a lot nicer than the 4-track deck that I'm using right now. So it should be a nice upgrade for that, and you know, not have the expense of the big reels and the, you know, it's a smaller footprint and all of that stuff. So I think this is going to be a really fun project. And so I need to check and make sure that the pots are not noisy and all that stuff after just a quick cleaning on them, and then go see what this thing sounds like. See if it'll record and play back, you know, something that sounds really nice, which I'm hoping it will, because that'll help speed along being able to service up my big Tascam 32 deck, which is the one I'm really excited about. And I am going to have to figure out the whole NAB versus IEC equalization, because I think those high-end tapes that I was wanting to buy a few of are all IEC equalization, and so I'm going to have to modify that Tascam 32. I'm also thinking about upgrading the op amps in it when I get it apart, put some of those Burr Brown modern op amps in it, do some other, you know, fun stuff to really elevate its sonicness to a new goodness. I know that's probably kind of a goofy way of saying that anyway. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. And I didn't see any other videos of people showing how to put a belt on one of these. There's one video from about 10 years ago, and the guy basically shows it with the cover off, and he just points in there and says, there's the new belt. It's like, that wasn't helpful. So hopefully this was helpful for you folks that maybe want to pick one of these up that has a broken belt and turn it into a working machine. So thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe. Please like the video. Thanks to all you Patreon supporters and you other folks that support the channel in other ways, like joining the channel down below. And thanks to you folks that make direct donations and just, yeah, you folks that have subscribed and been regular viewers. I really appreciate you guys a lot. So anyway, till the next video, have a nice day.